Congratulations, you made it to Section 3. In this section, we will learn how to effectively use and update data in our application. Together, we will explore what happens to your state, how to use actions to update your state, accessing data from the outside world using effects, and how it all fits together. In this video, we're going to focus on learning what Hyperapp does with your data. Understanding where your data goes and how that affects your app is crucial to building efficient and powerful web applications. Let's get started. I'm sure at this point, we've written some code. You probably have a bit of a mental picture of maybe what Hyperapp looks like. Take a second, pause the video, and maybe even draw what you think happens. It's okay, I'll wait here. Your mental picture probably isn't too far from this. Here's a list of things that we know. We call the app function and pass it init, view, and node. We know Hyperapp remembers our state. Our view function receives state and creates a virtual DOM tree. And the virtual DOM gets translated into real HTML elements. This is a great start to understanding Hyperapp, but it's missing the most important piece about an interactive web application. That's updating the state. This is where dispatch comes in. But maybe not the way you expect. Dispatch has 3 jobs. It will run your actions, it will run your effects, and it's the gatekeeper to your state. Let's go over these terms quickly before I continue explaining dispatch. If you've written code for Hyperapp version 1, you may be somewhat familiar with actions, but they do behave a little differently. Instead of partial state merges, our actions are responsible for returning the entire application state. Hyperapp 2 also doesn't give you access to actions in the outside world, just inside the application. Actions also must return synchronous values, so no promise or async await or any other asynchronous code. Being limited to synchronous code means we need a way to go to the outside world in a way that doesn't directly impact our application's purity. That's where effects come in. The easiest way to trigger an effect is by returning a tuple of state effect from an action. Actions return a value which is immediately handled by dispatch. This is what is preventing us from using asynchronous code. To get around this, we can use an effect. An effect function takes props and dispatch as parameters. With props, we can pass in configuration, and with dispatch, we can tell our application to do something when our side effect has completed its job. That might be returning an HTTP request, delaying for an amount of time, or any sort of code that manages or mutates data outside our application. With dispatch in our hands, we are bound to the jobs discussed earlier, calling an action, calling another effect, or setting the state. Here's a more complete diagram with newly added blocks bolded to help us see where dispatch is used. Let's trace through the diagram again now that we know what responsibilities dispatch has. As I mentioned with the dispatch jobs, init gets passed directly and immediately to dispatch when your application starts. And does your init value sound like something we just discussed? Yes, it behaves exactly like the return value of an action. I think that helps connect the dots a bit more. Continuing on, setting the state triggers a new render, but this doesn't go straight to the web browser. Instead, we use patch to do a little more work than just rendering. Patch also wires our actions to use event CB. Instead of event handlers, we pass actions, and Hyperapp runs those actions from event CB, and the results are passed into dispatch. This is the behind-the-scenes loop for keeping your application alive. We discussed that init is an action, and if there is no effect, your application is stuck idling, waiting for an event to trigger the next action. If there is an effect, your application runs it immediately and waits for it to dispatch the next thing. And we already know dispatch will run our action, which takes us back to our first step, but instead of init, it's the result of our action. This loop continues forever, or at least the lifetime of the application. Now that we understand what Hyperapp does under the hood, we can use that information to add features to our HyperNews application.